To chair the panel, Affordability and the Energy Demand Surge, Managing Costs in a More Volatile Energy System, please welcome Secretary General, International Military Council on Climate and Security, and Board Director, Atlantic Council, Sherry Goodman.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Ooh, can you hear me? Yes, maybe too well. Okay. All right, wake you up after lunch here. If you need to adjust the mic a little bit, okay. I'm very happy to be here with you all, and I think it's been a really great conference so far, and we're looking to continue that with this next excellent panel that we have on affordability and the energy demand surge, managing costs in a more volatile energy system. We have really a great group of panelists here with us today. I'm going to start with Alex Fitzsimmons, who's the Associate Deputy Secretary of Energy and Senior Advisor to the Secretary of Energy. He's focused on implementing the agenda to build a more affordable, reliable, and secure energy system for the American people. He's got a decade of experience in energy policy and recently served as acting Undersecretary of Energy and Director of CSER. I think most people in the room understand that acronym. And so you've had, and you were the Chief of Staff, so you've had what we would call in the Defense Department several battlefield promotions.
Ooh.
There. So
I like that one.
Yeah.
We'll have to use that.
Okay. And next we have Tim Holt, who is an executive board member of Siemens Energy and president of Grid Technologies. He's got extensive experience at Siemens Energy across many different portfolios and many different countries, and was previously the chief operating officer for Siemens Gas and Power, and has held a number of leadership positions within Siemens Energy. We're very glad to have you here, Tim. Okay, and Josh Parker is head of corporate sustainability at NVIDIA. I think you all know that acronym. And he's leads sustainability and leads it where it's critical for effective sustainability program, and he built that program previously at Western Digital, a computer storage company. And last but certainly not least, Bonnie Titone is Duke Energy's Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer. She's got an enormous portfolio here that includes everything from facilities, real estate, enterprise strategy, telecom, and cyber, and has extensive experience at Duke and in communities. So our panel today is going to talk about the central importance to energy of reliable and affordable energy for governments and end users alike. And as we work to maintain energy reliability and affordability, of course, we know that the sector is contending with historic energy demand growth, higher infrastructure costs, commodity volatility, and growing political sensitivity around consumer prices, industrial competitiveness, where we cite AI data centers. And we're going to discuss all of that today with this excellent panel. Okay, so let's start with the fact that energy affordability is increasingly a kitchen table issue for households and a component of competition for businesses, and a lot of discussion about rising energy demand. From your perspective, and I'll ask each of you this to address this question, what does it take to keep up with that moment and deliver at the scale and speed required?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And first, we just want to thank the Atlantic Council for putting on such a fantastic event. It's an honor to be here. So yeah, I'm here to talk about what the Trump administration, particularly the U.S. Department of Energy, is doing to build a more affordable, reliable, and secure energy system for the American people. I think it's important to put all of this into context, where on day one of his second term, President Trump declared a national energy emergency precisely because we were on an unsustainable path of skyrocketing electricity prices that rose by about 30% between 2021 through 2024, at the same time that energy demand was rising and that resource adequacy was getting worse. So nonpartisan grid operator NERC has called the current situation facing the bulk power system, a 5-alarm fire for the grid. And that is simply because we are retiring prematurely way too much reliable dispatchable generation year over year, tens upon tens of gigawatts of reliable dispatchable generation that's needed to meet peak demand. When you think about the history of the electric power sector, last 20 years growing at a essentially flat power demand, compound annual growth rate of 0.5%. Now we're growing 5 to 10 times faster than that year over year to reindustrialize America, win the AI race, and lower energy costs for the American people. Those are the goals that we're pursuing. That requires us to build an energy system that is reliable and dispatchable, to build the most reliable energy system that we can at least cost. And unfortunately, the disastrous energy subtraction policies of the previous administration put us in an unacceptable position for President Trump and Secretary Wright. And so we have been working to rapidly replace that energy subtraction agenda, where we were seeing way too much dispatchable generation retire, with an agenda that's focused on energy addition, with a three-pronged strategy that I'll get into later about stabilizing, optimizing, and growing the energy system so that we can add more incremental capacity to meet peak demand, which is what the energy system is built around. That is how we achieve these mutual goals of building the most reliable energy system that we can at least cost for the American people.
Okay, Tim, if I could ask you to address the same question, and I know Siemens Energy has long been supplying into the energy sector here in the United States, all forms of energy for many years, so maybe you could talk about your role there.
Yeah, maybe to add on what Alex said, I mean, generation is one. On the other hand, you also need to move the electrons from where they're generated to where we need them. And I think it's a fact, the infrastructure is old. There's more demand on the system than currently we can solve with that infrastructure. And the question is then, with affordability and an aging infrastructure, what's the best way to renew that infrastructure, to build that out and make sure we meet the demand growth that we have seen, especially driven by AI. And I think the first thing is really it starts with planning. How do you do a system approach, not just do individual projects, but look at it, how do we build a optimized system? And the second, what we also see, a lot of what we do is very individual. When I talk to utilities, everybody says, yeah, let's standardize, but according to my standard. And the question is, how do we really industrialize the industry? If I go into the factories we have on transformers, they do 100 transformers a year, they all look different. So the question is, if we really want to do this massive build out, increase capacity, but keep it affordable, we just have to all come together and say, how do we do this in the most affordable way? How do we standardize? How do we optimize the system? And how do we really then also meet the pretty ambitious timelines that we have, given with the increased demand?
Josh, NVIDIA has a special role in this energy ecosystem. How do you think about that question?
So I really liked the way you framed it, Alex, in terms of stabilize, optimize, and grow. I think all of those are important. And I think we're actually in really a golden moment. We have a golden opportunity right now to do something that I think most people would recognize we need to do, which is invest more in energy infrastructure to make a smarter grid, to build transmission, to build more generation, all of the above, so that we have a more efficient and ultimately more affordable energy system for ratepayers as well as for companies to spur economic productivity and to allow us to take advantage of this AI revolution. So the optimization piece is really interesting because as we think about how to build, if we were to just start from scratch and say, how do you want to build a modern grid today? It would be something different from what we built decades ago with the energy infrastructure. And one aspect of that, where NVIDIA is trying to play a positive role, is in the optimization side, having a smart grid where you have, in addition to dispatchable energy and variable energy, you have variable demand. And this is an area where I think there's huge opportunity when we see the utilization of the existing infrastructure and the potential to open up tens, if not 100 gigawatts of unused capacity currently by taking better advantage of demand flexibility. There's a huge opportunity for us to capture the moment in the near term, in addition to growing kind of medium and long term, to capture the moment by introducing the concept of flexibility into things like AI data centers. And this is one of the technologies I'm most excited about with NVIDIA, is we're piloting this DC Flex opportunity with partners like Emerald AI, where we're saying, okay, we've built for peak capacity. Most of the time we're not using anywhere near that. How can data centers soak up the unused electrons when they're available in the system, and then curtail their demand when everybody's running their air conditioning units? And we want to prioritize the ratepayers and the essential services and so forth. So I think there's a perfect opportunity for industry to help facilitate the transition to a smarter, more efficient grid, and also to help pay for it. Because honestly, the value is so high with AI that there's a lot of interest from all of NVIDIA's partners and kind of downstream customers in making the investments necessary to enable this. So we have this kind of private funded opportunity to help expand the grid, to help make it more optimal, and ultimately to support energy affordability as well as reliability.
Right. So flexible power for AI data centers on the grid is, maybe in this room, a lot of people know about it, but I think across America, probably a lot of people think of AI as just being a big energy hog. But what you're saying is that really that doesn't have to happen. We can use AI to create better, more flexibility for the energy use.
We absolutely need more energy. That is a near-term imperative, like wherever we can find it. Optimize existing infrastructure, build more. We need both. But yeah, that's a huge opportunity, especially in the near term, to, again, support affordability and reliability by making better use of the infrastructure that we have.
Yeah. Bonnie, you're on the front line with many of these communities now, having to tell the story about growing energy demand and growing energy prices. So tell us how you work with your customers and consumers in your region.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it is about delivering that reliable power in an affordable manner across our service territories. That's job number one for us, and it's a balance that you have to keep because of everything you just heard about the infrastructure, needing to modernize it, handling the new demand that's coming on. Do you have the generation and the transmission and the distribution for that? And I think as it relates to our customers, that's the secret sauce to some extent. I think the more that we can get out in front with our customers before we put a shovel in the ground is really where we're going to drive the trust and the ability to continue to deliver on this demand. I think we've had a track record over 100 years of really being out in front of the communities and talking about what are we really doing and how that's going to benefit them, and driving a discussion around what it's going to look like for them. And I think you have to start with that. I think if they become an afterthought, then nobody's successful, regardless of the partnership that we all do to work together. And so, that feels really important to me. We have to start with the customer and make sure that we understand their demands and their needs, and then help them with what we're trying to accomplish and find something that's mutually beneficial to both of them. And we've seen the success when we lead from the customer perspective, less about what we're trying to deliver.
Great. Well, Alex, can you tell us more about your new role in the Department of Energy and what specific policy measures you're focused on to manage growing energy demand and bolster affordability?
Yeah, happy to do so. So yeah, under the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Wright, I'm focused on implementing the department's energy dominance strategy to build a more affordable, reliable, and secure energy system for the American people. And what that looks like in reality is, the U.S. Department of Energy is now the largest energy lender in the United States. So we have about $250 billion worth of lending authority through what was the Loan Programs Office, is now the Office of Energy Dominance Financing. And we are looking to provide low-cost capital. We have cheaper debt than anyone else can offer, in combination with policies that the president himself has championed to the point that our colleague here was making, make sure that the residential ratepayers are being shielded from the cost of building out this incremental infrastructure, energy infrastructure that's needed to meet rising demand. So you may have heard during the State of the Union address, President Trump unveiled the Ratepayer Protection Pledge. Never thought we'd hear the words ratepayer protection in a State of the Union, but President said those words, and then a couple weeks later, he held this historic meeting at the White House with the major technology companies who signed the Ratepayer Protection Pledge, where they agreed to revolutionary principles that have never really been tried in the electric power industry at this scale before, to shield residential ratepayers from the incremental cost of service. So what they agreed to was to buy, bring, or build their own generation to meet their energy demand. They agreed to pay for all of the network upgrade costs associated with serving their load. They agreed to enter into long-term take-or-pay agreements with minimum demand charges regardless of whether they end up using that electricity. And then they committed to increasing the investments that they're making in their local communities, in addition to the job creation, to all the tax base that they bring, that these AI companies are bringing to local communities in the form of building new hospitals and schools and rec centers, generational types of investments that are going to make a long-term difference for people on the ground. And so all the leading tech companies signed that agreement. We're focused on making sure everyone upholds their end of the bargain and actually implements it. And we have a powerful tool in our lending authority through our Energy Dominance Financing Office, where we are doing deals with major utility companies. So just a couple of months ago, we closed a $26.5 billion loan package with Georgia Power and Alabama Power. It's the largest single federal loan package in the history of the federal government outside the financial crisis. And it is an encapsulation of the president's energy dominance agenda. It includes 6.5 gigawatts of nuclear uprates, 5 gigawatts of new gas generation, 3.5 gigawatts of battery storage, a gigawatt of hydropower uprates, 1,300 miles of new and existing transmission, and because of the cheaper cost of capital, the interest rate savings, $7 billion in savings that will get passed along directly to ratepayers in Georgia and Alabama. That has enabled those utilities to file for multi-year rate freezes and rate reductions in their state. So they are accommodating increased energy demand and load growth, combining it with cheap capital, cheap debt, from the U.S. Department of Energy, and they're putting downward pressure on rates. So this is a model that we are hoping to replicate all across the country so that we can achieve affordable speed to power.
Okay, that's great. I'm sure Bonnie then is Duke on that, riding that train as well.
Obviously, when we look at the massive amount of infrastructure that we're going to develop, we have the largest capital plan of any utility in the country, $103 billion that we'll spend in the next 5 years. All of that is around the grid modernization, the upgrades of the infrastructure, operates, everything that you've heard the rest of the panelists talk about. And for us, we are constantly looking at how do we execute that plan with the customer in mind to bring that downward pressure on the rates. I mean, our rates are below the industry average and below the rate of inflation. Not everybody can say that, and it's because of our deliberate look at how we're going to execute, and more importantly, what can we take advantage, which certainly the DOE, the grants and the loans that are available are something we've taken a very hard look at and had some success that has initially come out of that, and we'll continue to do that. If you couple that with the fact that we're going to combine our Carolinas utilities, that's going to save somewhere around $2 billion plus, and we're taking advantage of the solar and the nuclear production tax credits. That's going to save another $3 billion. So you'll see $5 billion coming out of things that Duke is doing that is directly going to help our customers. That's very important to us. We have to modernize and meet the growth, but we also have to maintain the affordability and the reliability of our systems. It's super important.
Okay, Tim, I understand that Siemens Energy has opened a new AI lab in partnership with NVIDIA in Florida. Mm-hmm. Can you both talk a little bit about that, what the significance of that?
Yeah, and I mean, we heard about this great build out and investments, and how we look at it. I think there's two things we have to do. And I look at the grid, it's like a highway that has constant congestion. So there's two things you need to do: build more lanes, and we just heard about it, and the support. The second one is, how do you get more cars through the existing lanes, or if you're four? And that's, I think, where especially the AI lab and how we look at the grid and how do we run the grid more efficiently comes into play. And I think that's an important part that we also need to play, because it feeds right into the affordability. If you can use the existing assets, the existing lines, the existing substations, but get more load through it, that's a big benefit. And secondly, what we have also seen also in other countries, the more you build, the more curtailment you also see, because you cannot move the electrons through different regions through the grid. So it all pays into using AI, using digital tools to run the grid harder when it's needed. And we talked about the data center, so they're all built for the hottest day where they run 100% load. If they don't run it, how do we then redirect the electrons through the grid and do it? We do it with a great partner, NVIDIA. Always get kind of constantly challenged and said, hey, we got all this compute power, can't you do more on the grid? And let's make sure your knowledge on the grid, how the different assets run, how do we combine it with AI, and how do we really then come up with better controls? We see self-driving cars more and more, so I think the vision is have a self-driving grid that basically optimizes itself.
And I would just add that, when we talk about the challenges that we're facing in energy or anywhere else in the world, and I'm as head of sustainability, I'm thinking about things like climate and education and resource conservation and things like that. Any of these challenges that we have, even if we see AI's footprint growing in the near term, and it is growing, AI ends up being just a fantastic solution to kind of across the board, because it does add, as the name suggests, intelligence to whatever we're pursuing, whether it's scientific discovery, whether it's optimization of existing energy infrastructure. I think the smart grid aspect and the concept of virtual power plants that's AI enabled is really a fantastic future to think about. How do we optimize everything, at the micro scale? Batteries that are charging, EVs, again, variable generation, variable demand, fixed generation, fixed demand, orchestrating all of that in a way that increases utilization, much, much closer to 100%, and allows us to manage both reliability and affordability at the same time. That's the promise of AI in the energy sector. And again, that's useful kind of across sectors as well, as we think of, do we need more intelligence at these big problems? And I think across the board, the answer is yes, it's beneficial.
So Josh, let me ask you, as head of sustainability and with the massive energy infrastructure build out, how are you thinking about how to ensure reliability and climate resilience with increased weather volatility or response to deliberate incidents or attacks on the grid, cyber attacks, deliberate attacks? We have to make our infrastructure more resilient to a variety of threats. Yeah. How do you incorporate that into you?
So I'll admit right away, I'm not an expert on the security side of things, but the kind of implications of AI to support robust infrastructure and cybersecurity is fantastic. So AI to help defend our infrastructure is a key component of that. On the climate side and the resiliency side, AI is fantastic at climate and weather modeling, number one, to help us, again, make better use of existing resources to plan out where additional resources can and should be built to prepare for catastrophes, give advance warning of that. And again, the concept of flexibility is useful there as well. If you have a lightning strike or some other downtime that's created in the system, the flexibility concept for data centers means, okay, we can curtail the data centers and reallocate that energy to more urgent needs. So I think that's clearly an opportunity where AI can help us on the resilience side. And then the last thing I'll mention is thinking about climate change writ large. More and more organizations, the International Energy Agency, World Economic Forum, Boston Consulting Group, the Grantham Institute, are concluding that AI is poised to lead to net emissions reductions. So long term, if we're thinking about tackling climate change generally, AI is actually probably the best technical solution that we have available to us. And there are lots of reasons for that. Energy reductions in other sectors that are much larger energy consumers through AI optimization is just a dramatic opportunity that I think is underappreciated. But that's the prospect, again, of more intelligence that helps us solve that problem as well as the others.
Okay. So if I were pretend I am a citizen living in a community around the U.S. where a data center is about to be built, and I have some concerns about whether it might be my rates or the fact that there's going to be this giant plant in my neighborhood and my kids are going to school, and all the concerns that we're hearing from citizens around the country now in various communities, from Virginia to Utah and other locations. How would you want to talk to? I'll start with you, Alex. How do you want to talk to that citizen?
Yeah, I think President Trump put it well in the Ratepayer Protection Pledge meeting with the CEOs of the top tech companies, where he said, "You all have a PR problem." And he was right. I think it is mostly a PR problem, although not exclusively. I think that the tech sector is doing a much better job working collaboratively with communities. I mean, data centers were not really on anybody's radar a couple of years ago when they were starting to build more of this infrastructure and move into these communities. And I think the industry, in partnership with the power sector, has stepped up and is taking community engagement quite seriously. I think it starts with explaining the costs and benefits of this infrastructure in ways that we don't typically talk about it inside the Beltway, and haven't until this point actually talked about it even on this panel, right? These are relatively esoteric topics that most people are not tracking on a day-to-day basis, but so I think but there are real tangible benefits. So it's not about marketing, it's about talking about what matters to people. And people care about jobs and investment in their local communities, even more than energy prices or winning the AI race, right? People don't, that's an esoteric concept to most people, but they do care about revitalizing their communities, seeing jobs and workforce development in their communities, seeing larger tax base that this investment brings. I mean, there's one county in Georgia near, not far from Atlanta, that is attracting data center investment to their county and is actually trying to eliminate property tax in their county entirely because of all the investment and all the tax base that these hyperscalers are bringing. Eliminating property tax for the average person, on top of being able to rebuild schools and hospitals and rec centers, make real investments in the local communities, invest in workforce development, because this is the industry of the future. I mean, people can be convinced on this issue because we have the facts on our side. The industry until this point has not done a particularly good job of articulating the specific benefits to specific people in specific places. But that is now starting to change, and that's what we need to lead with. And then, of course, people care about energy prices and which way their power bill is going. And so that's where I think at the Department of Energy, we have a key role in partnership with the electric power sector and with the technology companies to try to plainly explain how the typical supply-demand dynamics that apply to virtually every other industry do not always apply here. Where you think rising demand would necessarily raise prices, not necessarily true, because of course we know that the way the utility business model works is the more CapEx gets spent across a larger rate base. If you have a fixed cost that's spread across a larger rate base, you can put downward pressure on prices. So it's about plainly explaining to people that if you implement President Trump's Ratepayer Protection Pledge, where you are ring-fencing the additional cost of service so that the technology companies are paying for generation and transmission infrastructure that they pay for, that the rest of the community gets to benefit from, That's a formula to lower rates, and we see a number of places where this is working. I mentioned Georgia and Alabama, multi-year rate freezes. There are a number of other jurisdictions as well. Indiana, Michigan Power, an AEP subsidiary in Indiana, announced this year that they're going to be filing for a rate reduction due to load growth from these AI customers. Other places. As well, NV Energy in Nevada just came out with a new large load tariff. They're calling it the Ratepayer Protection Tariff, implementing multiple provisions of the pledge. We're seeing a number of jurisdictions, companies, and utilities proposing tariffs, and then that will implement the pledge, that will isolate shield consumers from the incremental cost of service of these data centers, and will start to put downward pressure on rates. So that policy framework, then combined with, as I mentioned, the low cost of capital that DOE is providing to dramatically expand and rebuild our energy infrastructure at least cost, will start to pay dividends this year. You will see more companies starting to file for rate reductions if they're doing those two things in concert, and so we look forward to seeing more of that happen.
Tim?
So, I mean, we're the technology provider, but I would give 3 data points that would support, why data centers make sense. One is what we have seen in the last 18 months is more and more data centers, because of the speed and how fast they need the power, they start looking at behind the meter, buying their own power generation to make sure they get the capacity fast enough. That shows that they're willing to pay for their power. So they don't mind paying extra or paying the fair share for the power they need to consume. So that's the first data point. Second, also when you operate the data center, you need to upgrade the grid. Data centers fluctuate, so you need grid stabilization, you need upgrades of substations. So that all is being paid by the data center to make sure the data center can operate stable, but it also helps to upgrade the grid. And keep in mind, what we spent the last 150 years on the grid, we need to spend in the next 15 years just to modernize it and get it up to the level we need it. So data centers are actually paying part of the grid update, the upgrades that we need to do anyhow over the next years. And then the last point I would make is, I said it earlier, the data centers are built capacity, what they use for hottest day, full capacity. They're not using that power, and that extra power is actually being available to the rest of the service region, to the rest of the consumer. So I think all these 3 points are very beneficial for the communities and actually show there's benefit from a data center in your community.
So I think about this a lot, the community opposition that we're seeing to data centers, because I think it has a potential to create a tragedy if we don't take advantage of this moment and use AI to its potential. But I think it's, again, a great opportunity for us, because it's a really good conversation to have. And it's true, the industry has not done a great job of explaining this, the pros and the cons of AI data centers, to acknowledge the impacts that they have. But to also highlight the positive impacts. So making sure that we're having a very thoughtful, data-based conversation about the positive and negative impacts is how we get to good policy and to good outcomes and transparency. And I think if you're able to have that conversation and say, okay, what are the potential impacts? There's the energy increase, there's the potential emissions, there's the impact on ratepayers, of course. People are concerned about the water. Then we can have that conversation about, okay, but what do modern AI data centers look like? How much of that is accurate? How much of it isn't? And what are the benefits? And for example, on the water side, and I know we're talking about energy today, but is an example of how old data sometimes leads to misunderstandings about current impacts. On the water side, with direct-to-chip liquid cooling and at NVIDIA, we have a 113 degree Fahrenheit intake temperature for our cooling system. So if you think about like a hot tub, how hot that is, we're cooling our chips with water that's hotter than any human would want to get into for a hot tub. And what that does is create a very efficient system where you can put data centers in a lot of the regions in the United States, most of the regions in the United States, without having to use chillers, which leads to less noise, which leads to basically zero water consumption, and leads to more energy efficient cooling. So it's having the conversation is, I think, where we need to be to try to acknowledge the concerns that people have, but also to talk about the benefits, to talk about the taxes that are funding real, tangible benefits for communities where these data centers are being built, the jobs that are being created. And this is always harder to do, but to draw the line between the data center that's being built, the AI data center, and the kind of AlphaFold, the health sciences, the life sciences, and the health benefits that we're poised to see. You know, a cure for diabetes, better diagnostics, in addition to all of the environmental benefits that we see from it. So it's a conversation we should be having. I think we should welcome it. We should acknowledge it. We should show up, and then we should talk about, okay, but what makes sense? This is a solvable problem. Let's look at the data and see how we can do this in a way that supports communities, but also allows us to build this essential infrastructure for the country.
Yeah, I won't repeat much, but I think this customer first component comes into play here. I think right in the beginning of the planning process, when we think about where's it going to go, we have to get in front of the customers and drive conversations across the companies that are involved, because it is going to take everybody doing their part in order to make it a reasonable thing for the customers to accept and get their head around and want within their community. And I think, you know, if you think about us, we were one of the first ones out of the gate on our first more recent data centers, not the data centers that have been in our footprint for a decade, around making sure we have contractual structures that do protect the customers. Things like, upfront capital, so that we're not using capital from the ratepayers. We're using the large load customers' capital. Looking at penalties for termination, minimum demands, so that they're using some of the demand and things of that nature. All of those were structured so that we can protect the customer. And I think the more that we can get out and talk about those in conjunction with them, even before we even get to the point where we've signed something, I think will drive some of that education that we were talking about to make it more comfortable. I think the other thing that we don't talk a little bit about that is, in a typical data center, over a 15-year contract, that's $1 billion that can go back to the customers. That's that downward pressure that Alex was talking about, because you now have that larger population against the fixed costs. And the more data centers that come in, the large loads, they're covering a larger portion of those costs. That's good for our customer, because we have to do the upgrades of some of that infrastructure anyway, right, just from an aging grid perspective. So I do think it takes the partnership. I think it's everybody talking about what's happening within their space to bring reality to the situation. I think it's going to be really important.
Right. This political moment reminds me in some ways of the opposition to nuclear power some decades ago, particularly after 3 Mile Island in the United States, combined with other forces which led to a generation of not building out very much nuclear power. Now we regret that that we're not leading globally on nuclear power, both for our own country and to be a reliable global supplier, instead of China or Russia around the world, as more and more nuclear energy is coming online. So I hope we can avoid this moment for AI. But let's get to the last question I want to touch on. We've talked a lot about various types of capital. Let's talk about the human capital component. Because we need not just technology, but people, and how, I'm going to ask each of you to think about how you're thinking about the workforce challenge. How do we get the right skilled trades, to engineers, to permitting staff? We actually haven't talked about permitting yet in this session. I think every other one.
Shocking.
I know. Every other session I heard this morning had a lot about permitting. But we need people to do a lot of these different jobs, and we need to retrain our workforce so that they don't feel that their jobs are just getting eaten by AI, that they actually see themselves and their future through this next generation of energy and AI opportunity.
Start with me.
Okay.
Sure. Well, yeah. First, I think hopefully AI can solve a lot of permitting challenges. Can't pass the permitting bill that Congress needs to work on. But after that, maybe they can streamline permitting for especially technologies like nuclear power, which is actually something that DOE is working on. Yeah, I think on workforce, this might be a slightly contrarian view, but at least from my perspective at the Department of Energy, we work on the very, very white collar end of the workforce typically, where we have national laboratories, we employ a lot of scientists and engineers and PhDs. We do some construction too. We're typically funding other companies that are doing work in other communities. And I think there is some federal role in workforce development, certainly, and DOE has a number of workforce development programs, especially for earlier career professionals, especially in science and technology fields. But I think the real workforce challenge is mostly a private sector challenge, and it's one that I'm particularly impressed by how especially the technology companies and the manufacturing companies that are investing in local communities, they need to hire the workforce that they need to build whatever it is and operate whatever it is that they're building and operating. They have the most local knowledge on the ground, and they have robust apprenticeship training programs, community college programs, and they have the capital to do it. And so I think you just saw Microsoft, for example, unveiled this major new workforce development initiative at the White House yesterday, where they talked about creating new career paths in AI and in technology fields for people who may not otherwise have access to it, other than the fact that Microsoft is building a data center in their community. So I think you're going to see a lot more like that. And then I would just end, but the point you made about nuclear, this moment resembling nuclear power, is really important. And I'd add one more point to that. It also resembles fracking. The fracking era from 10 years ago. You think about, could you imagine where the United States would be today if we had had a national ban on fracking? Think we used to be a net energy importer, Secretary Wright talked about this morning. We used to be a net energy importer. We were building LNG import terminals, and now we recently celebrated the 10-year anniversary of our first shipments, our first exports of liquefied natural gas. How dramatically that's changed the geopolitical landscape, strengthened energy security in the United States and around the globe, strengthened U.S. manufacturing competitiveness. Just tremendous. Now we're by far the #1 producer of oil and natural gas in the world. It's allowed us to have cheaper natural gas prices today than we had at the start of the conflict in the Middle East. Could you imagine? So I could compare that to AI today. If we cede our leadership in artificial intelligence to other countries like China, we will look back 5 to 10 years from now, and it'll be a real shame. There's no reason why America cannot both lead in AI and reindustrialize the United States and lower energy costs for the American people at the same time.
So workforce, a headache, a good headache to have, but just the sheer demand and the ramp up we're doing puts a lot of pressure. So just, the grid business, over the last 2 years, we hired 6,000 people globally. We're going to hire another 6,000, 1,500 here in the US. And how do you tackle that? We do complex engineering, we do complex manufacturing, we do complex project execution. One is we're really looking at expanding existing facilities, just putting a greenfield in, hiring 600-700 people on a greenfield. We don't believe that's really feasible, so we're using the existing facilities and doubling or building a second factory really close by. And of course, we're not alone. Our customers hire, so we're in Charlotte. It's, everybody tries to draw on the same resources. So it's really essential early on going to the community colleges, working with universities, getting co-ops in, and start people early on into the business. And with Alex on AI is going to do a big part, so there is efficiencies, but at the end we need people really on the ground who are winding a transformer, who are putting shovels in the ground and building substations. And that's where we really look at how do we really early on get engaged and get the people and experienced. So that is one of the areas. I think what we also have to keep in mind was this tremendous growth. At one point, and that's probably 3-4 years out, I'm going to have one experienced employee with one new employee. And just in terms of culture, safety in the industry, it's another additional challenge. How do you really make sure in an industry that's built on knowledge, on people who are decades in the business, how do you transfer that to the new employees? So that's one of the other challenges we are facing and we're addressing currently.
Okay, we're out of time, so I'm going to ask you both to be very brief in your last comments.
I'll just say, how fantastic is it that we're talking about having so many new jobs that we're having a hard time staffing it because of the AI revolution. I know there's been a lot of concern about the disruption that AI might cause to the job market. We're creating new jobs, really good jobs, and to have a shortage here where we need more employees is a good place to be in. And then I'll just say that AI actually, I think, is probably the most effective technology for reskilling and upskilling that we've ever seen. It's so fundamentally democratizing that if you want to upskill or reskill, AI is going to be the enabler, probably better than any other technology, to help you make that pivot when you need to.
Yeah, I think for us, the primary focus is right people, right skills. Right? We have a massive growth capital plan that I talked about. To be able to execute against that with some sort of certainty and reduction of risks is really important. So when we think about the specific skills that aren't going to be AI enabled, like linemen, we've partnered with 22 colleges across all of our service territories to have a lineman certification so we early get them exposure to that. And just last year, our foundation put $1.8 billion against every other kind of skill. So think welding, electrical, all the other things where you're going to need to have hands-on. I think it's incredibly important for us to continue to fund those and support those programs. So where AI won't have an impact in efficiency and efficiency of the job you're doing, that you have the people and the right skills with the right people in place to support it.
Please join me in thanking our excellent panel this afternoon.